All right. Good day, everybody. This is the Kubernetes SIG Architecture Conformance Subproject meeting for July 14th, 2020. I'm your host, John Bellameric, and we are ready to get started. Please remember that this is a community in which we value each other and respect each other, so please follow our code of conduct. And let's get started. Yes, the recording is started, Chris. So, do we have Michelle on the call? She has added a item here for us. I don't see her on the call. All right. Well, I will provide some context on it because she's talked to me about it. What's that?
Go ahead and provide context. I was going to say, it looks like Michelle joined, but...
Oh, she did. Oh, great. Michelle.
Hey, sorry, I'm late.
That's okay.
Are we talking about the item I added?
Yes.
Yes, you are number one.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, so basically, we had a bug come in, and it turns out that this behavior that this conformance test was testing is actually not desired behavior that we want. So what we ended up doing was fixing this bug and removing the conformance test for it. And now and we did this in 119. The main question I have now is it possible to actually backport this change, because it is a bug fix, and we do have users that are hitting it, so it would be nice to be able to backport this to older releases. But the main challenge is because it was also modifying a conformance test and removing a test case from it, that might cause, like, I guess, this would have to, if we backported it, it would make this change in the patch release, and it might cause, if people are testing against, they're testing the older releases against a version of the conformance suite that doesn't have this new change, then now their conformance, they will show that they're failing this new conformance test.
Yeah, so basically one thing I was thinking about.
If I can just to help me understand. So you've in one sense, this is lowering the bar because we've removed
yes.
that, but in another sense, it's raising the bar in a different area because previous clusters won't be able to not do the thing, and you're verifying that they should be able to not do the thing now. Is that right?
I'm not sure about the conformance process, what version of the conformance suite to run, but if they run a version of the conformance suite that has the old test, and it doesn't have the new change where we remove the test, then if they run the older version of that conformance suite against a cluster that has this patch, then they're going to fail the conformance suite.
I believe the intent is for the conformance suite to come from the latest patch release or the contents of the release branch. So they should always be running the latest version of the conformance suite or the latest patch release of the conformance suite. We'll double check the CNCF documentation, but it is my impression that we release an updated version of the conformance runner that Sonobuoy uses, which is used by the majority of people to certify. And so they should be using the latest patch release whenever a patch release comes out.
Okay, then that should be okay, at least from a test passing point of view. So if an older cluster was testing against it that didn't have the fix, then it's just that test case. We removed the test case, so it's just the test case won't run anymore. And then newer clusters that have the fix, they'll also run against the newer test case, which doesn't have the test anymore. So that should be okay from like a test passing point of view. We wouldn't, as long as people run against the latest version of the conformance suite for that release, then they shouldn't see failures.
Yeah. The only glitch is, and I don't think it's probably significant, is that like when we document the versions of, when we document conformance tests in their metadata, we specify the version, either that it was introduced or if there's a change of behavior, the version it changed behavior. And there's two things. One, we only typically put minor versions in there, although I don't see a reason we couldn't put patch versions. But two, if we remove the test, we actually don't have like a tombstone metadata in there. So you actually, there's nowhere to put that information, like to say, oh, this test was only valid through this version. But I think that's a, realistically, if somebody gets a, you know, like Aaron said, probably if they're submitting a new conformance for a particular version, then they should be using the latest version. And if somebody else pulls it down, the other area I was a little bit trying to think about was these are supposed to be reproducible. So if somebody, say, creates a cluster in an older version and then runs, or rather creates a brand new cluster, but you know runs an older version of Sonobuoy, they'll see a failure, but they would just raise a ticket, I would think, with CNCF, and then we would just resolve it there manually, because we would know what the problem is. So I think it's probably fine.
To whomever, I would like to make an action for me to go back and careful check that Sonobuoy is actually pulling down the latest thing, but I believe that to be the case. And if not, we should make it the case.
Right.
And I really appreciate you raising this issue, Michelle. I guess my
All
other
right.
question, would you want to do negative testing for releases going forward? So to say, like, actually, later versions of Kubernetes should not allow this behavior at all.
It's a good question. I think we might want to let the bug fix soak a little bit, just to make sure that it doesn't cause any more problems. And we might have to make another fix or something in the future that might change the behavior again. So I think once we can actually confirm this is indeed like the behavior we want and it's you know, it works in all of the cases that we are thinking about, then I think we can think about reintroducing the test case with the modified behavior.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I think at this point, though, we didn't want to like cause too much churn by potentially adding something to conformance that we weren't quite sure about, that we wanted to actually have this be conformant behavior.
And I think we wouldn't want to backport that negative test either, because
No.
that,
Yeah.
Got that.
could cause more confusion. Yeah. Okay, sounds like that issue's closed. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And you're welcome to hang out or drop off as you will.
I do
next
have
item-
another meeting, so yeah, thank
All
you.
right, thanks, Michelle. Bye. Next item is so Aaron, did this PR actually merge? Because it was in the retest queue for a while, but Aaron should be now an approver for the test conformance.yaml test data. So one more woohoo! Congratulations. One more increased bandwidth there. And I believe this next item is Hippies, but I know he said his voice is bothering him. So I can, if somebody else is ready to talk about it, I'm familiar with it somewhat. I'm not sure what conclusion you want out of bringing it up in the meeting, I can summarize it and then I can be corrected. What was that?
I just want to see that that last item is a reasonable path forward, and there's not some other thing I'm missing. We use kind, and I think we use hack up to bring the clusters up, and I just want to make sure that we can modify that process to include an audit destination, an audit center.
Okay.
So are you familiar with this, Aaron? You want me to summarize?
Not 100%, but vaguely.
So as I understand it, basically right now, in order to get the data for API Snoop, this dynamic auditing configuration is added, and that's been pulled. So dynamic auditing was alpha, was decided it should not move forward for a variety of reasons, and was removed. And so now there needs to be an alternative method. The alternative method is through a static configuration for auditing as opposed to dynamic, but that means it has to be done during cluster bring up in the flags. And so the question is whether that's an appropriate approach for getting this data out of the conformance run. I guess my question would be, Hippie, is we're using the CI conformance runs for this, or we're just, because if we're just running it, we can run it however we want, right? Whatever part of CI.
I think I can clarify a bit.
Okay.
So there's two parts where API Snoop is getting data. One is using like existing runs, and we just pour through them and get the user agents and tests and such. The other one comes when you have a test writer who is writing a new test and wants to see which endpoints that test is hitting. And so they're like running functions against a cluster. And then API Snoop is seeing the endpoints being hit live and seeing the user agents that are being hit live. And the way that we do that is with this dynamic audit sync. And so anytime where there's a issue opened or a pull request opened that says, like, we have seen that if you were merge this test, it would hit these 5 endpoints, like ones that like Caleb opens or Steven opens. The way that they're getting that number is through this program that is using the dynamic audit sync.
Yep.
And so it wouldn't affect like API Snoop the site, but it does affect API Snoop as a way of generating information for PRs for new tests.
Yeah. So it's like this reduces the number of Kubernetes offerings that API Snoop could run against to validate the data that you are collecting against that particular offering. You are now instead limited to offerings that you have the ability to specify the command line arguments for the API server. And so that means hosted offerings such as GKE or EKS or AKS are not offerings that API Snoop can sufficiently audit API coverage of. From my perspective, I don't feel like that is the conformance definition subproject's problem. But in so much as I think it's been useful to make sure that when you're running a test, it works against multiple different Kubernetes offerings such as kind and kubeup and kops or whatever, right? And those options all do allow you to specify the API server command at startup. So I still feel like I trust if it's a question of like, do I trust your development process given the limitations of API Snoop? Like given that API Snoop can't do a dynamic audit config, I do. I think I trust the coverage data that we're getting from you. It could mean that longer term, if you want to make API Snoop strategically useful, if it turns out we decide like API coverage is a useful thing for measuring different profiles, and maybe one of the profiles is something that can only run on hosted offerings or offerings that don't allow dynamic, that don't allow static audit configuration, that's where feel like the API Snoop team will need to put their caps on and think about like admission webhooks or something to see if they could get similar coverage. But
I'm not sure that's the issue, Aaron. I think, and I don't know who ZZZ is, but if you can clarify, maybe is it that you're worried about not being able to run it against these different hosted offerings, or is it that you're using in order to do a CI to do a check in GitHub, you're using the specific CI runs that happen today, and you'd like to configure one of them to contain this static auditing configuration?
Yeah, it's and I could introduce myself with more than initials. I'm Zach. I'm also part of II, and I do a lot of stuff with API Snoop.
Okay.
But yeah, it is a like particular flow that is related to how II writes tests and how we've like advocated writing tests. And so the flow, as best as I can describe it, is a test writer will create their own cluster. API Snoop attaches to that cluster and starts and listens to all events being passed to it, listens to everything that's happening. And so you can then write a test or write a function, give that function a user agent and use Go or client, kube client or whatever to run that function against the cluster, at which point API Snoop, because it's been listening with that dynamic audit sync, will see these are the user agents that are currently hitting these endpoints, including this custom user agent that has just been sent by the test writer. So it's completely self-hosted.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so definitely then you should be able to do it however you want. You don't even need to change a CI job. Then that seems like a reasonable approach for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
yeah, like I said, I wasn't sure if the ask was like, will we lose confidence in API Snoop because of this? No, like I trust your test writing process. I know we got to the land of like looking at audit logs because we maybe did try looking at admission webhooks and couldn't quite get all the data we wanted. And we talked about like intercepting network traffic, and that maybe didn't quite work either. And those may be alternatives you want to explore if you find you need that down the line. But what we have, we trust your test writing process.
Okay, awesome. Next item, I'm not sure who put this on, watch tooling. So I guess, Aaron, you gave some advice around improving the watch tooling or the tests and the way they're using the watch tooling, and there's a video. So is there anything, I'm hosting, but I didn't put this item on here, so I don't know exactly what the ask is here from the group. Or if it's just a note.
I think it's to confirm if that's where we're going.
Okay.
Any disagreement, please voice it now.
That sounds good to me. So to recap, my concerns were it felt like it was introducing way too much complexity. If this group is trying to sort of demonstrate how to write clear, concise, simple, readable tests, I felt like having a bunch of tooling, it seemed like we were headed in the wrong direction.
So I guess I can go back and watch that video because I missed that, but like part of that, the reason that tooling was introduced was because Clayton was concerned about some things. I don't know if it addresses it, your new way addresses his concerns as well.
Yeah, so I haven't had the time to go thoroughly reevaluate every single use case against which this is applied, but there's some really simplistic use cases where we don't need to address Clayton's concerns. And I did try to do a bit of a postmortem on how we got to now. It's, I feel like the lesson, as always, for this group is that high latency discussions can introduce a lot of whiplash and uncertainty. And so I think each thing maybe seemed reasonable at the time. We maybe overlooked some off-ramps to something slightly less complex. But yeah, this sounds good to me. And we can, there's one test where I feel like Clayton's concerns may be valid. And as far as for me, it's like the data is king. So like if the data says that it's not flaky, then it's not flaky. But I was trying to have an extra eye toward code quality since I felt like the II team was trying to like set the pattern going forward for how to write clear, concise, simple, and effective tests. And it was that part that I wanted to course correct, not so much that I was operating on like, this looks really flaky.
Okay.
Next
Okay.
item.
Next item, gate tooling. So you're saying there's 9 new endpoints that are currently showing new without any conformance test. That's in 119?
Yeah, and I think it actually might be related to Michelle's point earlier. Between two data runs, there was some endpoints that were covered previously that were not, and it might be from a conformance test being removed.
No, unlikely. That was a endpoint. It would be one endpoint. It was one test, and it's probably an endpoint that's covered it with a particular configuration or a particular set of operations against that endpoint. I mean, I can't say that for sure, but I suspect that's not it. And certainly wouldn't be 9 endpoints from one being removed. So we do need to investigate that further and get a list of what those endpoints are and where they used to be hit, because there should be, you're saying they're new, they don't have conformance tests. That probably means they weren't covered before. They're new endpoints in 119 that we haven't submitted conformance tests for. There were a few different things in flight that I thought, oh, good. This was in. No, this is waiting. This is waiting for. These tests are written. They're waiting for 2 weeks of non-flakes. They have like 10 days right now. These are events V1. I'm thinking of events V2.
Just a point of meta feedback, it now seems obvious to me now that you're raising this, the conformance progress site that you have on API snoop.cncf.io is sort of naturally going to beg these kinds of questions. You've got a chart that shows these really nice colors that says, here's what's new tested, here's what's new untested, so on and so forth. And it immediately will lead to the question, oh, well, so what are the new untested endpoints? It would be great for discoverability, and actionability is not a word, and I hate myself for saying it, but making it more useful to help link to that next step. For what it's worth.
No, that's great feedback.
Related to this, but this might be D2. Oh no, I see. Yeah, yeah. This is it probably. This was waiting on data for non-flakiness. So that was 7 days ago. So actually, it's probably can be done now. Although there was a change. What was the change? Anyway, I can look at this offline. Did she add one more test? Oh, I see. She just promoted one more test.
There is one more test, and that'll be picked up by Stephen. It was one that Liggett's team accidentally missed, which is one of the points around we probably need a gate and a comment or at least a common, if not a hard gate.
Right. Okay. Anyway, I think this is probably ready to merge now. Did she link the? Let's test here for you. Ooh, this one is looking. Oh wait, no, that's metrics grabber. Events API. I've got from 7.1 through 7.14, all green. That looks good to me. All right, well, somebody from instrumentation needs to approve it as well. So, but conformance-wise, it's done.
Cool.
Okay, next item on the agenda. Look at that. We actually resolved something. Exciting.
I think the next item is API Snoop.
Sorry, reading that, I guess.
So you've updated the website.
Oh yeah, sorry. I can speak to this. Two new updates. So the site now has that conformance progress page, which will be improved and added to and such. All of the data that we're getting now is being generated with this link, the SnoopDB. So it's similar to what was shared before of just creating some JSON or YAML of the current coverage and grabbing that for the site. With the other intention of that is to make it really simple to run up the database that has a number of preset views and such into it. One being, what are the new endpoints per release that are still untested, so you can get a nice list of the ones to focus on and such. One thing that I wanted to mention with the site right now that is being fixed is that the conformance progress page is showing higher numbers for the number of endpoints hit than if you were to look at any releases individual sunburst. The reason for that is because the newest data that we have, there was a suggestion to look at this different test run bucket that included disruptive tests and serialized tests that the bucket that we were using previously did not include, which meant that there was a number of tests and a number of endpoints that were conformant that we weren't seeing in the previous sunbursts. In that progress page, we used the latest test data plus the OpenAPI specs plus the conformance YAML and the conformance YAML, like where each test has its release date. With those three different files, we are able to historically see when an endpoint was introduced and if it's being hit by a conformance test and when that conformance test was introduced. So we can then like historically go back to say, what did it look like in 1.18, what did it look like in 1.17, et cetera. But it means that the sunburst currently is missing out on those additional tests. I'm looking into if there is a different historical buckets that we could use to see stuff for those, or it might just be doing some manual work to update the JSON that those sunbursts are being pulled from. But I wanted to explain that discrepancy.
Okay, thank you.
Sense. GCS buckets age out after 90 days. I may have some older stuff that I might be able to help you with. If you poke me offline, we can figure out if there's another way to get you the data that you need.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I think it would just be a one-time, because I'd essentially get it, turn it into JSON, and then that would be the historical. Like, there shouldn't be
Right.
a need to update what 1.16 looked like over and over again. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice. It's good.
Yeah. No I might not have the data, no promises, but I will do what I can. Cool. It looks like I'm the next thing on the agenda. I just wanted to sort of recap. I presented the conformance profiles proposal here 2 weeks ago. I felt like I didn't get a ton of feedback, but I've shopped it around a little bit. I also presented it at the Testing Commons meeting to get some feedback from, and SIG testing to get some feedback from people who are like CI Signal and who are test authors and interested in testing patterns. Generally, what I am hearing is that people would rather just do the boring, keep using tags route instead of anything that's fancy or clever.
Fancy and clever gets you into trouble every time, right?
Yeah, and so I'm fine with doing the boring thing that makes this way more painful for all humans. I feel like what I want for final consensus or sign off is to get buy-in from the SIG architecture leads at the meeting on Thursday. So I've sent out the design proposal to the groups today, and would like to chat about it on Thursday. Does that sound reasonable?
Yep.
Yep.
You can add that to the agenda. You go ahead and put it in the agenda if you haven't already.
I will put it in the agenda. Too many meetings. Yeah, and I think I haven't actually followed up on this. It sounded like one of the things that came up with discussion between some folks here last time was that the II crew is helping the CNCF sort of create a tool or a site or something to automatically verify that the set of conformance tests that are run equals the expected conformance tests that are run. And y'all are looking on how to do this retroactively or historically. And I feel like it would be good for us to align our efforts there, since part of the profiles proposal does talk about ways that we could sort of retroactively go back and define profiles, and talks about how we could define a tool or a service to help automatically verify this stuff. I have not had the time to follow up with y'all, but it would be cool to do so sometime. That's it for me, unless there were any questions.
Okay, I think that sounds good. We'll talk about that on Thursday then with the bigger group. I would like to be involved in that follow-up as well, whoever's Hippie, if you're taking notes there. So I had planned, but not completed, planned to present some rough sketches of what profiles might look like and get feedback from this group, but I didn't get a chance to do that, but I will plan for that for next next meeting. And what I'm trying to think about are things like, you know, should there be a Windows profile to apply Windows-specific tests to Windows nodes? Should there be I think there should be a profile that separates out privileged workloads from ordinary workloads in some way, and cluster administrative operations versus workload-oriented operations. But exactly how all those things are going to fall into buckets isn't clear to me yet. One thing I thought I'd like some feedback on, I was thinking about, is we actually have two different types of conformance tests, sort of broadly speaking. And one is sort of conformance, like API level conformance, control plane level conformance from sort of an external operator trying to make the cluster do something or run a workload or whatever it may be. And then the other one is the runtime environment itself. So if you look at some of our conformance tests, some of them apply to, I can use, pods, whatever. I can create pods and I can delete pods, right? Okay, that's a control plane thing. But then there's other ones that are like, a pod can use host networking, which is really about well, it's kind of both. I guess you need the control plane to tell the pod that it can do it, but there's sort of the data plane aspect of it that we test, and we test the control plane aspect of it. And so I'm wondering if it's useful to think about the different tests in those categories. So when I run a test that checks that my workload can look up DNS services using specific DNS names, or I run a test that checks that two pods can talk to each other over the network, like that's from the workload point of view, whereas the creation of those services is from the control plane point of view. And I don't know if there's anything there, but I wanted to bring it up as something to think about. Like, do we need to think about, the idea is portability of user workloads. Okay, say we've got a workload. Definitely that means that the control plane functions have to be there, because the way we define our workloads is in terms of these manifests to talk with the control plane. But if the runtime environment, like in Windows, this is kind of why it came up for me. In Windows, the runtime environment is different. So when we're testing Windows conformance, if we're going to add some sort of Windows conformance test, they're really not going to be about the control plane per se. They're going to be more about the data plane and the runtime environment in which the workloads finds itself. Anything to do with downward API, for example, is kind of like from the things that are, the downward API mounts a bunch of stuff in a directory, right? So like, if I recall correctly, then that's from the runtime environment of the workload is what you'd be checking there, as opposed to being able to launch something or create a service. As we divide things up into profiles, I'm wondering if that's an important distinction or not.
This is something I guess I've typically thought of or shunted off into the domain of like node E2E or adherence or conformance to pluggable interfaces like CRI and CNI and CSI, things like that. But
right.
To your point about like two pods being able to talk to each other is something I would want to verify across nodes, which makes me think it's not necessarily something I can verify with a single node. And I like the concept of thinking of it in terms of the data plane instead of node runtime environment for that reason.
Okay, well, if anybody has any thoughts on that, reach out to me. As I go through these ED tests, I think I'm gonna at least try to categorize them that way in my head, whether we make use of it or not in profiles. I kind of, something's bugging me, like that there's something there that we need to make a distinction about, but I'm not sure yet.
Yeah.
I mean, for a workload to successfully run on a given cluster, you need the control plane APIs that it expects to be there, and you need the runtime environment to work in the way that it expects, right? You need both of these things.
Right.
And in general, we haven't had to differentiate because we're all Linux, right? And the runtime environments are just sort of expected to be identical everywhere. But and maybe we don't care, right? Maybe we don't need to distinguish these, but it's just something I want to give more thought to. I thought I'd bring it up here.
It's valid, I guess, because like you would never, if I'm thinking about these as separate concepts, like you'd never be able to verify that the data plane acts as specified without the control plane, though, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Um,
But you could be missing a part of the control plane, and the data plane could still operate in an ordinary way. But again, this is maybe a distinction without a difference, like as far as like conformance tests are concerned. But
yeah, I don't know what actual thing to say here, but I think
but I think this is kind of what this maybe I'm just recycling. Like this is kind of what I was trying to get at. Part of what I was trying to get at with the behaviors, right? That testing endpoints at the control plane level isn't sufficient to determine whether a given workload is going to run successfully in a given environment, because you're not testing the data plane. But that's anyway. I don't want to go back there. Okay, that's all I want to say about that. Is put it in people's heads, and if it bugs you like it bugs me, then in 2 weeks we can talk about it. Otherwise, we can forget about
it. Okay.
I have nothing else. Anybody else?
It would be good to go through the particular promotions that need an approve or a milestone release to make sure that those move forward. And there was an overall suggestion from Aaron that the proxy options would be a good place to go next. And just wanted to get some initial direction, even though we've already reached out to SIG Network and API Machinery, but not much there.
Okay. So these listed here. I guess I'm not showing this screen.
Yeah, I just remember there are a variety of proxy. If you're looking at this purely from an endpoint coverage perspective, there are a variety of endpoints that all relate to proxying, whether that be to a node or a service or a pod. And there are many different operations for attaching or proxying to a specific path or proxying with a specific verb. There's lots of potential coverage. Is that how useful that is for user-facing workloads? Maybe I don't have as strong of an opinion on that, but if I'm looking at this purely from the perspective of I want that little orange core part of the sunburst graph to be as filled out as possible, it's a lot of proxy stuff.
You're seeing my screen now, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, the agenda, okay. So you're saying the core has a lot of proxy things, a lot of endpoints missing there, all those proxy endpoints, I see. I mean, we do expect, like, I think we do expect those things to work. I mean, like,
yeah.
Something that I see that if we're going to look at a pattern, let's make sure we find a decent pattern that works across them all.
Yeah, I had tried taking a stab at this a little while back. It was just it's been a little more involved than I've ever had at the effort to push over the line. Things have evolved enough that it's worth somebody taking a fresh stab at it. But it felt like it is probably worthwhile to verify that all the HTTP verbs we expect to go in one end and pop out the other end actually do so unmodified modified as expected.
Presumably there's ED tests for all of this proxy code already.
There's an E2E test for proxying, but it only really verifies that the get verb works, and it only verifies that it works on certain ports. So it doesn't do any verification with regard to subpaths that I am aware of, and it doesn't verify that other verbs like post, put, head, connect, stuff like that go through as expected. And it could be like maybe this is just an artifact of over focusing on API endpoint coverage. Maybe some of these don't necessarily make logical sense and we should exclude them from the list of possible API coverage. But I think if I were like a really paranoid or uncertain user, I'd really want to make sure that all the verbs that I put into Kubernetes or Ingress or whatever actually ended up in my application looking the same way as I expected unmodified. So I feel like it's worth covering, and if you do it right, you could probably make it a pretty table-driven sort of test.
Yes, I would think so.
Since we're talking about issues in PR triage, maybe I'm stating you all already know it, but I thought I would remind us that test freeze is currently scheduled for August 6th. So that means even though code freeze has happened, you can still add and promote tests up until August 6th. The only additional requirement now is that it needs to be in the V119 milestone. If you find a PR is not going through for that reason, please feel free to poke John or myself. We both have the ability to do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
If this one is already approved, this needs to be approved by somebody.
I'll take a fresh look at the PRs that are linked in this doc. This is at long last my last meeting for the day, so I may actually have some time to sit down and do something else.
Yeah, I mean, some of these, so this looks like I approved this one a while back, but we need approval from, I think you're in the test ED common, right? You can approve those, Aaron?
Sure, I didn't realize I hadn't dropped an approval for that. I can do that.
Oh, okay.
I'll cycle through all these.
That's 16, my goodness.
That'll be a good one.
Oh yeah, it's just checking API groups.
Michi gave a lot of good feedback and refinement on that one.
So right now, this needs to be done by somebody in API machinery. So Uligit or David Eads or.
Yeah, I think that may have been my comment about this. It's like, I don't, from an API machinery perspective, I would want an API machinery person to make sure that this is doing what we expect. I think my quick glance at it was like, oh, this looks like it's just hitting a bunch of endpoints and verifying that the endpoints get hit. Is there any actual resulting behavior that we should expect? Are there any API machinery subtleties that we would want exercised as we look at hitting these groups? And I guess I had all of those thoughts in my head and didn't actually write that down in a comment on this PR, and I'm sorry for that. But that's what I thought I had written down. Yeah, I just don't feel like I'm enough of a subject matter expert to know if.
We can ask them, Aaron. We're also trying to figure out how to increase engagement on that. In this particular PR, if I remember right, we're iterating through the preferred available versions of the APIs that are returned and ensuring that those preferred available APIs are actually available.
Right.
So it's more than just it is a dynamic walk.
Yeah, that may very well be. Like, I was just kind of, I was hand waving off of a memory there. I won't take a deeper look at this, but if I still feel uncertain, I will point to somebody from API machine.
Yeah, I feel like somebody from API machineries needs to say whether this is relevant or not, like whether it's meaningful or not. But I guess from the point of view of like, does a cluster even, yeah, that it's meaningful in the sense that, right, we don't know what, if somebody's re-implemented the API server, it should follow this behavior, right? So probably it's meaningful.
Kind of defining, if you say you're going to do this, let's make sure that it's there. And this is
Right.
the API. But yeah, if we need to do that, let's maybe reach out to individuals. I've not had a lot of general.
Yeah, no, you got to pick somebody. It doesn't do any good to just send it to a group. If everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. Daniel, or I mean, Clayton's the obvious choice, but he's busy. So any of these folks need to be the ones to do it.
Okay.
We have 5 minutes left. So what does this do? Ingress status. Oh, I see. Read note ingress status.
That test covers the one endpoint that was missed by Legacy team. So we reached out to them to tell them we're willing to pick it up for them, and Stephen did us this right test. So based on what Legacy team done already.
I've sent a ping back on the original ticket that was opened up about 27 days or so back around it and asked for some feedback. So I'm still waiting.
Did I just see somebody removed API machinery at the bottom?
This doesn't look like an API machinery test. This is a network.
It's only for networking, isn't it?
Yeah. So Fetty's one of the chairs of the API machinery.
Honestly, if you want to get API machinery's attention, Fetty's not a bad person to ping. He's not the person to handle it, but he'll route it to somebody.
This isn't an API machinery thing.
No, this isn't. Sorry, my head was stuck in the previous thing.
Oh, in the previous one. Yeah. Yeah, Fetty would be a good person. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is just creating a test that pulls the status out, and we expect anything in the status. Is there any requirement what should be in the status?
And it matches the regex of the version.
It's confirming the UID is the same as what was originally created.
I see. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, John.
Networking I can do.
And DNS, I hear.
That's all the same. All right. Cool. We're out of time. A lot of things on the list. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next time.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Happy Tuesday.
Thanks.